Hey everyone, this is your host Elif from Antler, Canada, and you're listening to Founder Files. This is a series of conversations with founders in the earlier days of their entrepreneurial journey. You will learn about their experiences of finding a co-founder or co-founders, validating ideas, and finding product market fit. Let's get started. I'm joined by Liza today, the CEO and co-founder of Chexy, a company that is setting the new standard for paying rent. That's a bold mission, but I absolutely love that as a tenant that has complained about this issue for the past 5 years of living in Canada. And a fun fact that I just learned today is that Lisa was the first founder that signed with Antler Canada. So I feel very honored to be joined by you. I'm super excited for today's conversation. So welcome, Lisa. Thanks for joining me today.
No, thanks for having me. And listen, I've been a tenant for the longest time myself. Also came to Canada as an international student like 10 years ago and have been a renter since. And I've paid rent in many different ways, most recently via checks. And I think it was just the reason of how checks started. It was me getting fed up enough with that issue to try my hand at solving it.
Yeah, and I'm glad you are solving this issue. Someone is tackling this issue from a tenant perspective finally. So tell us a bit about yourself and maybe an elevator pitch for Chexy for those who don't know Chexy yet.
Sure. So Chexy is a rent payments platform. As you mentioned, we target specifically to the tenant, and our whole mission is around making your largest monthly expense, being rent, more rewarding for you. That is by virtue of being able to earn rewards on your rent, as well as the ability to build credit on your rent, which is especially important for that huge population of newcomers coming into Canada every single year. So that's about Chexy. In terms of me, I come from a pretty traditional finance background. I was in investment banking to start, got my CFA. And then most recently, how I actually got into the payments world was I took a finance and strategy lead role for Canada at Square Canada. And it was actually during COVID. So Square was the company that relocated me to Toronto. I was previously based in Vancouver. And it was in the middle of COVID. Nobody was even doing in-person showings. And obviously I had to find a place to live here. So I didn't even see my place that I signed for in person. Nobody meet back then in person, yet my landlord still insisted I hand deliver her 12 positive checks to pay my rent. And I guess it was one of those like aha moments where I was thinking to myself, I'm working for one of the biggest digital payments companies in the world. We have seen adoption of digital payments across verticals, even verticals that traditionally have been laggard in that space, like home and repair, professional services. COVID has completely changed and accelerated that. But rent, which is my biggest expense and the biggest expense for so many other people, is still being paid in this like 100-year-old method and gets me absolutely nothing. And especially as someone who came to Canada as an international student, struggled with credit building for a long time, this was something that just resonated so massively with me when I started researching the space and starting to think about why it's not the case. So that's how we came up with Chexy.
Amazing. But the key thing that I want to catch from that intro is you had a major problem. You identified the market for it, but you didn't leave it for someone else to solve it. So you decided that you're going to tackle this problem. Did you always know that you would one day start your own business? Did you have that like entrepreneur bug inside of you, or were you so fed up that you pivoted and decided to go for it?
Actually, the latter. For me, I never thought I was going to be an entrepreneur. And to be honest, if you told me that 3 years ago today, that I would be sitting here a year and a half into building our business and be venture backed, I would probably not believe you because
Mhm.
I came from a background of a family business and my dad worked really hard to build the business from the ground up in Eastern Europe. And by virtue of being like in a pretty unstable macro environment, we've seen some ups and we've seen some huge downs. And the amount of risk you take on as an entrepreneur is like nothing else that you can compare to. And there's a lot of things that even as a founder, you can't prepare for because they're out of your controls, like macro conditions,
Exactly.
political change, or anything else like that. Maybe less so in Canada on the political side. But the point is, I came to Canada and I thought to myself, you know what? I can make a pretty good amount of money just working for someone else, grinding up that corporate ladder. And I was very happily doing that. That's how I ended up at Square. I was making great money at Square and I was very happy with my team and what I was doing. I think it was just my personality and coming across a problem. I came across this problem multiple times moving. I came across this problem the last time during COVID. And it just wouldn't leave my head, I guess. It was just
Mm,
sitting there like a bug being like, but why is this so difficult? Like, why does something like this not exist? It seems so trivial. It's not like we're trying to build some deep tech new way of doing things. This works everywhere else, but it doesn't work on the biggest industry for me.
yeah.
So why is it like that? And I started working with my co-founder Abtine, like first just on the weekends. We were trying to figure out the problem. We're both economists by trade, and so we're looking at it. Why does it not exist? What are all the forces at play here? Started talking to other tenants, started talking to other landlords, and realize what's wrong with the industry overall and how that kind of translates into payments. And I think eventually you just get so deep into it that you're like, okay, I actually think there's something there. And
Yeah.
point, it's a question to you personally. Like, are you willing to take on all that risk and really try, knowing that there's a 99% chance that you'll fail? Or are you not? And also, is it the right time for you? And it just so happened that for me personally, it was the right time. I was in my late 20s. I had some savings. I don't have any dependents. So for me, it was like if I was going to try to do
Yeah.
something this crazy, that was probably the perfect time because what do I have to lose if I have to eat ramen noodles for 6 months because I can't afford
No.
anything else? That's fine. So that's essentially how kind of it all got started. But I was definitely not one of those people who was like consistently thinking about ideas and how am I
Yeah.
going to start a business. It just came to me. Yeah.
Yeah. And then once it came to you, I guess it didn't leave you and you had to find a solution for it. I love
And I
that
will
story.
say it's completely like the last year and a half of doing this completely changed my perspective on a lot of things. Whatever happens with Chexy, obviously we're growing right now. We're going to work very hard to make it a massive success and do everything we can to do that. But even if for some reason it doesn't work, I think the lessons, the learnings, the people I've met along the journey have been incredibly valuable that I'd never look back in this experience and think, oh, I shouldn't have quit my job a year and a half ago and tried this. And I also think, I don't know if I could ever go back to the corporate ladder.
I know it's a different lifestyle, right?
It's a completely different lifestyle. And now I was telling this to my partner the other day. I was saying, this better work because I really don't want to go and have to get another job. I'll have to think about something else.
Yeah, I actually hear this from a lot of other founders as well. Like once they kind of transition and really adapt to the founder lifestyle and that flexibility or that ownership, maybe less of flexibility, but more of the ownership that comes into the play, it's very difficult to go back to your previous lifestyle and structure.
Yeah, I would say less so flexibility. Like for me, I work way more now as I did
Yeah.
before, even in investment banking days. And I also would say, at least for the career that I was coming from, especially at Square, it's a tech company. I was in a relatively senior role. So I had plenty of flexibility. If I needed to
Mhm.
take like a 4 p.m. coffee walk or an 11 a.m. dentist appointment, my manager wasn't going to be like, but you weren't in the office 9 to 5. Those days are long over. But now, if like on a Saturday there's a code red with one of our systems or something is not working, you're working no matter what. You're
Mhm.
missing your appointments, you're missing your flights because the onus is now on you and you are personally responsible for making sure that your clients and your users are happy with your service and also that your
Yeah.
service is functioning properly.
Absolutely. Yeah. There's no time off from whatever you choose to do from that point onward. So you mentioned a little bit about starting this almost 1.5 years ago or around that timeline and starting to work with Abtine, one of your co-founders. So once you had locked in on the idea and knew that you were going to do something about it, what were your options? How did you evaluate them? You know, did you join Antler as soon as you decided that you are going to pursue this path, or did you have other opportunities?
So, Abby and I have been working for a few months on just ideating, thinking about next steps, but both of us are first time founders. So, we have no idea what we're doing, right? And we had this grand ambition, which remains our long term mission and kind of vision for what we want Chexy to evolve for. Is to build a full scale marketplace for long term residential renting in Canada. Think about moving right now. Pain is a pain point, but there's other pain points around moving, like search, verification for landlords. All of these things right now take place in disjointed marketplaces all around kind of the web. All the landlords have different requirements for what you need to submit. So it's just like this whole process is incredibly inefficient and just like very archaic. And obviously, you tackle paying and everything, or like the whole life cycle of renting is very archaic. So we had this vision, and like I said, it remains our vision, is building the marketplace where you could have your profiles for landlords, your profiles for tenants. You can easily search, you can pre-qualify for places before you go to view it, so you're not wasting time essentially walking around into units that you're not going to qualify for. And then you can also pay through the same platform. It's all in one application. What we realized quickly is, like, with the marketplace, you have the chicken and the egg problem, like kind of the cold start. How do you go and
Mhm.
attract landlords when you have no tenants? How do you go and attract tenants when you have no landlords? And then we also realized there's a lot of people who've tried that and have failed for that specific issue. Getting supply is very hard, like attracting landlords onto a platform and monetizing is very hard. So we started breaking out different kind of parts of the process. And around the same time is when Antler came to Canada. And the reason I was the first person that they signed and one of the first people who applied is because by virtue of being a finance, I kept getting these job suggestions for Antler
Mhm.
hiring for its internal team on my LinkedIn for the portfolio manager role and so on and so forth. And I was like, oh, I've never heard of this VC, and I'm quite well connected in the space. Started looking into more of it. And then I was like, okay, if they're hiring in Canada, that means they're getting a cohort spun out in Canada. So I've never heard of that model. Obviously, I knew about YC, and we have applied for YC and never heard back, as many people do. But I've never heard of that like very early stage model. And I don't know. I just really like the idea of it being a startup school. Again, you try this for 10 weeks, you give it your best, you have a shot at trying yourself as a full time founder. And listen, if you don't like it after those 10 weeks or you don't get funding, you can decide to turn around very quickly and find another job. So I think for us, this opportunity just came in the right time for us starting to think about what's the next step. And we were like, you know what? Let's try it. Let's see if we'll get in.
Mhm.
We got in, and then we basically made a decision of what do we have to lose? Let's give it a shot and see where we get. And as we joined, like, we figured out payments was the way to penetrate this market, and it was going to be our competitive advantage into getting to a full marketplace solution years down the line. And that's how we got going.
Amazing. And how was your experience with Antler after the 10 weeks had finished? Or like throughout the 10 weeks, maybe what were some of the highlights, some of the most helpful things for you about the program or the community that you met through Antler? And once the 10 weeks was over, what happened after that?
Yeah, so I think the biggest thing for us, like I said, we were both first-time founders. When, Naaman and Bernie and Shrey were sitting in a room with them, they were teaching us the ways to think about problems like this. How do we validate a lot of these things? And maybe we've been validating some of them, we haven't been validating the other, but they essentially gave us the tool of, okay, this is how you should think about validating problems, and this is what you should do before you ever touch a line of code. Because obviously, being first time founders, when we came up with the idea and we thought we had a little bit of validation, the first thing we're thinking about is how are we going to build it? What is it going to look
Mhm.
like? Let's do wireframes. But actually, oftentimes, like, you need to spend months validating your problem and really finding your little kind of niche before you build a line of code, because otherwise, you can build the code and then nobody's going to use it for whatever reason. So it was very good in terms of giving you the tools and asking the right questions, of making sure that the path that you're pursuing is actually a viable path, not just for a business, but also a venture scalable business. Because if that's what you want to build, there's other questions that you have to consider. Size of the market. Is the market big enough? And so I think that was incredibly useful. We obviously had a bit of a different experience with the second, the third, and I guess the fourth
True.
and report, because we were in the middle of COVID. So the first month was fully online. I think that took away from some of the in-person interactions that the other cohorts
Yeah.
experienced. That's too, like, nothing you could do about this. This just was the reality of back in the day. But I think for us, it was just a good startup school. It was a good startup school. And after the 10 weeks, we ended up raising from Antler and becoming one of their first 5 portfolio companies. And that raise really helped us eventually get to our most recent raise. Like 2 months ago, we raised a full pre-seed round. That money that we raised from Antler gave us kind of the ability to go out there and spend a few months actually building the product, find our third co-founder, validate more, and was incredibly helpful.
Oh, that's amazing. Before this conversation, I actually came across your LinkedIn post where you did the similarities between being a first time parent and being a first time founder. And I definitely had a laugh out loud moment there because I think there are also a lot of similarities as well. And I wanted to ask you, like, how did things start to change once you get the hang of things going on? And do you want to share a bit more about that experience, like that hypothesis? Why do you think there is similarities between that? And also connecting with that, what helped you get through those initial stages of a lot of unknowns and roadblocks and maybe challenges?
For sure. I think until you have your product in market with real customers, whether you're in discovery, the build stage, the kind of iteration stage, because whatever you've built, you discovered actually wasn't used. I think the amount of unknowns can sometimes be crippling because oftentimes, like, you just don't know where to even start, what to do, because there's so many things that you could be doing. I think the other challenge I think I found that in our first years, you think you're gonna raise money, you're gonna feel better because you now have some money that you can actually put behind your project, maybe personally start selling, paying yourself a small salary. But I think the point is once you raise money, it's actually becomes more stressful because now you're worried about spending that money in wrong places. And you realize you only have a very, limited number of runaway months, so whatever it is, a year. And you have to make sure that you make the most out of that like limited capital you have. How do you do that? That was probably one of the hardest things of being a first time founder is like you've never done this before. And yeah, people tell you different. You have these mentors and you have even like we had Antler, we were meeting with them. But I think the point there's also comes a point where you're talking to so many people and as many people, there's as many opinions of how you should go about things that you also need to have conviction in what you are pursuing and how you're going to pursue that. So in many actually instances, we ended up going against of what like Antler advised us, including bringing a third co-founder as a CTO because our product is not incredibly technical. We were originally told maybe you don't need a CTO, maybe you can hire someone down the line. But as you started speaking to investors, one of the things that was very evident is investors care about the fact that if you're a tech company, you have a founder who is a CTO who is coding. And so the point I'm trying to make there is like you're gonna have many different opinions. You're gonna have many different times where it's I don't even know where to start and what to do. And you just have to try and hope that it works and have conviction and believe that what you're doing is gonna be for the best. And I think that's the parallel, I guess, I drew is I'm not a first time parent. I have no idea what it's like to be a parent, by the way. But a few of our friends, my partner and I recently had kids for the first time. And just like listening to them talking about sometimes your baby's crying, you have no idea why, you're trying all these different things. Like, at some point, like you'll work and you hear all these different advice from other parents of all.
Again, yeah, everyone has a different experience and different opinion about how to do parenting right.
And as much as like your baby is incredibly unique and your situation is unique, so is your company. And that's where
Yeah.
it's like you want to be hearing all of these suggestions because it's important to learn. But in the end of the day, you have to find and stick to the approach that works for you. And I think kind of the parallel, and that's one of the hardest things about being a first time founder versus once you have your product out there where we are and we have real revenue, real customers, you have so much to do, you don't even know where to start, not because you don't know what's the best thing, but it's like because everything is urgent and everything is always fire. So it's like the long days are gone of hypothesizing about things.
Yeah.
Now you just do because you have to do.
Yeah. And so I feel like there are different skill sets that probably came in at different phases of your journey. So what are maybe some skills that you think are very crucial for aspiring founders or founders in like very early stages have to stay sane?
I think your team should have diverse skill sets. So number one, I always say one of the biggest, I think, advantages of our co-founding team of three is the three of us have quite different personalities and quite
Mhm.
different skill sets. And it makes for a great combination because Ben is a great coder, not a great designer or product person. Abtine is a great designer, not a product person. Neither of them can do or want to do ops or fundraising. But the point is, we all play to our strengths. And as a result, our team becomes very, very well diverse. I would say generally for any founder, I would say only go into it if you really have a problem that you're incredibly passionate about solving. Don't go into it for the money or for the potential fame. A lot of people glamorize the founder lifestyle. It's a grind and every day is massive ups and downs. So unless you're personally able to essentially handle that and do that because You truly want to solve the problem you're solving and are you willing to continue hitting your head on the wall until you do, it's not worth it. There's plenty of other ways of making a lot of money.
Hmm.
So so the thing is like grit, determination, ability to handle the ups and downs psychologically and not like sometimes you'll have 3 really bad days in a row, but maybe they're followed by 3 really good days in a row. And you just need to believe that you'll get out of it almost like incredible positivity and being an optimist.
Yeah, I actually saw this somewhere. The most underrated skill or trait for founders is optimism. I tend to agree with that. You need to really, really have
You
that
had to
in
believe.
you. Yeah, you need to believe in what you are doing and yourself that you're gonna solve it. Like you're gonna get through this.
Also, a little, I think stubbornness helps massively as well. Everyone, like, so you have to understand, the odds are stacked against you whenever you try to start anything new. And you're going to have people getting on a call with you and potentially
Yeah.
saying, "Oh yeah, I've seen this tried before. I've seen this done before. It's not going to work or this is not worth pursuing." You're going to have these conversations and that's fine. If someone's never tried anything before, I would be worried because am I solving a problem that actually exists if nobody has
Hmm.
thought about it or tried it? But you almost have to have the stubbornness and the optimism to say, "I'm going to show you that it is possible to." And I believe that me and my team can make an impact
Yeah.
in the industry. And I believe we're the ones who will really change it. And you almost have to have it that way. That's really, I think, the only way you'll be able to stay like sane.
Yeah. And also, I mean, raise money as well, right? You have to,
For sure. You
you
selling the
have
vision.
to, yeah,
You're selling the
exactly. You
dream.
have to sell it to others as well. All right. So maybe in the last couple of minutes, I have a few questions that I love asking in terms of a bit of reflection. Knowing what you know now, is there anything that you would do differently as a founder, first time founder, or do you have any tips for aspiring founders that are currently working on their journeys?
I would say get to validation as fast as possible. Don't spend too much time building frameworks, hypothesizing. Spend some of this time and then run experiments and validate as fast as possible. The faster you can get to that validation stage and have true data showing, okay, this is a real problem and this is a problem that people are willing to pay for or in whatever business you're pursuing, that's when you can start building and actually testing it. And also, I would say get to validation not just through surveys, but whether it's wireframes or some very bare bone version of an MVP, get to that stage as fast as possible because people will tell you often what you want to hear. But when it comes to practice, that's where it's like the hardest. People tell you, I'll use it, and then they don't use it, even if they help co design it. So I would say that's probably the biggest learning for me is validate, experiment, test as much as possible and iterate as fast as possible. And listen, we've all read the lean startup and all these books that's what they talk about. But when you're in it day to day, you forget about it. And it's very easy for you to forget about it. So even though you know that's what you're supposed to be doing, sometimes it's like you have to force yourself to do this.
Yeah, that's true. It might feel easier to get obsessed about the dream
Yeah.
and the things that you want to accomplish, and you might not feel like you want to spend more time on validation. But I think this is something that I constantly hear from everyone as well. And finally, how do you feed yourself and inspire yourself as a founder? What do you get? What gets you going? What gets you fed in terms of like work and inspiration?
So I think for me, especially in my role, I get to talk to like incredibly interesting people almost every day. And I think that's one of the biggest learnings and also one of the most amazing things about being a founder is like you have other founders who run way more successful startups who are way further along in the journey. Remember what it was like to be you and we'll take a call with you versus like someone who just works at a corporate, right? And I think that's incredible. And you always learn amazing things about amazing people. I think the other side thing is personally, I like listen to a lot of podcasts about other founders, other businesses. Like my Twitter feed is filled with this and all these new ideas. And I find that to be like incredibly inspiring. And that doesn't necessarily have to be like tech business ideas. I listen to this podcast called My First Million. Amazing guys,
I love it
really
too.
funny. Yeah, and it's just sometimes they talk about like the randomest business
Yeah.
ideas as a founder, for me, this is cool because not every business needs to be sexy and venture scale to be like a successful business. And I think that's what a lot of the times now people overlook. but that's how I get my energy.
Love it. Okay, awesome. So where do people follow you and where do people follow Chexy?
You can follow us on LinkedIn. My name is way too long to try to spell it out.
I'm gonna have it in the description box below, so that
And
should make it easy.
then you can also follow Chexy at Chexy Rent on both Twitter and Instagram. And
Yeah.
also in our subreddit r/Chexy.
Yeah, which I love, by the way. I've been following. Yeah, I think you're now in Toronto and Quebec as well, right? So if
We are
anyone's
across
listening,
Canada.
oh,
Yeah.
across Canada, or okay, super.
Yeah.
So if you're a tenant and you live in Canada, go ahead and check it out and test it out.
Yeah. I would love your feedback.
Amazing. Thank you so much.